got started. They asked to record the session, so just so you know. So Don Shaw could not make it today. He is out sick, and so here, let me stick with that for now. So Victoria and I are here, and why don't we, like I said, why don't we go ahead and do introductions? I don't know that everybody knows everybody else. So Courtney?
Yeah, my name is Courtney McGahey. I'm actually going to be taking over the grad program director position for physics and astronomy starting in July. Brad's stepping down, so I'm bringing.
All right, well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Garner Dewey. I'm the Associate Dean of the College of Fine Applied Arts.
I'm Precious Mbiwa. I'm Program Director for School Administration in the College of Ed.
Mark Schwartz, I'm the Program Director for the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program in the College of Ed.
Tracy Gibson-Espy. I'm the Interim Director of the Doctoral Program.
Everyone, my name is Mel Falk. I'm an Academic Advisor in the College of Ed.
And I'm Ray Williams, the Interim Director of the Graduate Program in Biology.
Victoria Carlberg, Associate Director of Admissions and Recruitment. So, Courtney, you and I will be in touch soon.
And Rob Sanders, Associate Dean of Graduate Studies. And so, again, thank you for being here today. This is something a topic that we've been talking about internally and also sort of informally with folks for quite some time now. And it's a very big topic in our world of graduate education. When I go to the Council of Graduate Schools, the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools, the North Carolina Council of Graduate School Conference, at all of those meetings, everybody's talking about holistic admissions, especially at the graduate level in particular. And I think a lot of what we share today certainly has implications for undergraduate, for those of you who may be involved in that. But really our focus today is going to be primarily graduate holistic admissions. Graduate programs nationally are moving more toward a holistic approach, a more increasing access to graduate education, trying to involve more people in graduate education in a variety of ways. We've been kind of an exclusive society, if you will. Only about 10% of undergrads go on for a graduate degree. Now, obviously, some of that is because not everybody feels that they need a graduate degree or want a graduate degree, but I also believe that some of that is the result of us being very, very selective, very narrow in our admissions policies for programs. And again, there's a shift or there's a trend away from that to diversifying our pool, and that is one of the positive consequences of holistic admissions. But it's also taking the idea of diversity more broadly and realizing that what we used to consider as a qualified applicant may not necessarily be a full definition of what those qualifications may be, and that there may be many other qualified applicants who would excel in our programs who we've really basically kept out, both intentionally and unintentionally. So, so with that said, we wanted to start with a couple of questions. I realized I was kind of getting to some of these. And so, so let me stop talking and pose these to you. So what are some of the qualities or characteristics that you think would predict student success for programs that you work with? A program that you work with, or those of you who are working more broadly like Gardner and Mel, some of the programs that you're familiar with or aware of. What are the things that maybe think about a student that you've known who's done very well, who's been very successful in a program. What are some of the qualities that you would want to look for in other students like that student?
Passion.
Okay, passion.
We're a counseling program, and a lot of the qualities that we look for are things that it's hard to put on a rubric. We look for empathy and communication, emotional intelligence, social, social sort of awareness and social justice orientation. That some of these things are hard to measure.
I think I can say persistence and hard work.
I would say-
We need,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we need somebody who is a strong writer, but one of the issues that we have in measuring that is when you get a GRE score, and that tells you one thing about their writing skills. What it doesn't tell you is if they are in good enough shape that if they're given good guidance and they take that guidance, then they still be successful. So it's like using that as a cutoff can be dangerous.
I was gonna say being inquisitive, so one of the things that we have a fair number of students come into our program from our undergraduate program, and the ones that really have excelled are the ones that are diligent and inquisitive, and, ask questions and really wanna know more, and it's just kind of really obvious when you talk to them.
Any other thoughts? These are all really good. I mean, I would agree with every single one of those. So what biases do we currently experience in terms of our admissions policies, criteria, practices, culture? What are some of the problems that you've run into in trying to admit the students who have the qualities that you just described?
So me, I think it has been sometimes the references that I get from people about the students. The student might have a very glowing, CV, but then you hear about how they work with others. That might be a problem for me to accept them in the program sometimes.
Do you think those references are accurate, though? You may not.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to say.
Is there anything that we do that may be unfairly? Because if they're not accurate, then I think that would be an unfair assessment. But if they're accurate, that might be a good measure of their aptitude or potential success. Are there any things that we currently require or are part of the whole admissions process or practices that you think are basically either biased or are creating obstacles for those potentially qualified students too?
I recently, this semester in particular, I've been reading some articles, I've seen some articles about, for especially physics and astronomy, the way that we tend to write our letters of recommendation for female students as opposed to male students, we use different language. And I think for people reading those letters, they can perceive that language, even though it still might be positive, we use words like caring and tries really hard and passionate, but it's not strong student, sharp, those types of things that tend to be used for male students versus the more nurturing type of language that we use for female students. But I think from what I've been reading, that's still perceived as a weakness for the female students.
That's good. That ties, I think, nicely into what Precious was saying. That's an important point, because it's like we end up with the letters and we have to use those, but thinking about us as writers of those letters for students, I think, as others as our students are trying to get admitted elsewhere, is an important thing to keep in mind.
Well, one institution actually sent me, when they requested my letter for a student, they sent me links to articles that's what got me started on it, was they actually included that in their request for their letter of recommendation for the student. So I thought that was a nice approach on their end.
So definitely some gender biases in terms of maybe some of the things that we do or we consider.
I think there's a national conversation and definitely a campus conversation about test scores, just getting back to test scores. So it's easy to look at test scores. And, we're not obsessed with them in biology, frankly, except that we kind of are with the analytical writing score. But you look at a student who has a low test score and a higher test score, and you kind of automatically go, this is going to be a better student. And of course, that correlation just doesn't exist generally. So, we're, as you know, we're starting to talk about how we're going to even use GRE scores. And we'll start doing that in the department, but I think that's a real potential bias.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for sure, we're actually today at 12, we'll have our program meeting today in clinical mental health, and we're one of the, really the only agenda item is holistic admissions. And we're looking at doing a pretty significant revamp of what we do for our program. Specifically, one of the things that I'm looking at is the GRE and whether it's serving its purpose and what kind of impact that it's having. Even just the writing score, going back to what you said, we have writing elements in our application. We have a questionnaire where they have to write out pretty significantly detailed things about their backgrounds, and these scores come in and this writing score's low, but then I'm reading the essay or the questionnaire and it's really good writing. So I'm like, what happened on the test day? What happened? There's all kinds of things. So even just trusting those scores in general. So for me, I'm moving every day more away from wanting to even have the GRE as part of our application. So.
Mark and I are in the same department and the same thing. We're looking at eliminating the GRE, but our question is, what do you replace it with? There's plenty of research to suggest it's culturally biased. So why would we be omitting students that we would want here?
Well, I think socioeconomic. I mean, one is like, I see my children. One is a sophomore in high school. Is how do we prepare you constantly? Thinking, okay, is this going to help you to move forward? And how many children have that push? I think of rural, where that may not happen at all. And even with the GRE or the SAT or whatever, the preparation of it, correct, is like just take it and see how you do. While other people are like, bring your letters. We're going to review and we're going to help you. And so I think that still that socioeconomic really still has a strong influence of where you grow or who's around you and what is the system like, who's pushing this.
First generation.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think one of the things we will have to do, because we've been struggling with the GRE issue as well. And, I think that what you were talking about having the questions that you ask in your admissions questionnaire or your document is going to be key. Because I know for us, one of the things that I worry about, because I talk to a lot of these people on the phone, and some of the ones that I would worry about if we didn't have a GRE is when I have someone who calls me and tells me basically that they already know everything they need to know, but they need the letters behind their name and can they just come here for a little while, please, and get that. What I mean? It's that kind of tone. It's not really, and I'm, and what I'm getting at is, how do I put in to the questions that would be in the cover letter something that would get somebody to run on long enough that you figure that out.
Well, our questionnaire, going back to talking about days, our questionnaire is dated too, and one of the things that we plan to do is to take a look at those questions. There's a question on there about how are you with technology? I mean, well, maybe back in '85 that was appropriate, and I think maybe the questionnaires been around that long, but I think most folks are can run a computer and a word processor and things like that. So we have to even look at those questions too. But I think some of the questions really are great and do what you're talking about. And I think that's one way to supplement not having sort of those pieces. And I have a post-it note. I mean, we get sometimes over 150 applicants to our program every year. So I can't talk to every one of them on the phone, but I do get lots of emails from them and phone calls, and Victoria does too. And I keep a little name on post-it notes of people who say, how fast can I get through this program, or whatever the warning signs are. But
So if we were to move away from sort of these traditional, I mean, as most of you know, I mean, basically, the grad school, you have to have a 3.0 and you have to be above the, you have to be in the top 75th percentile, or I didn't say that right. Anyway, I mean, you can't be in the bottom 25th percentile, basically, for regular admission. And we have those criteria. And then, of course, some of your programs have additional things. But really, the focus on graduate admissions, for the most part, is GPA and GRE. I mean, or GMAT, or, but test scores. If we were to move more toward a consideration of these, what are referred to as non-cognitive attributes, how does that change maybe the makeup of your program? How would that change your practices, the way that you approached admissions? What impact do you think that would have?
But I wouldn't wanna put on our website non-cognitive aspects, first of all. So, I think that's kind of a flag to say, I don't know, it just doesn't sound academic.
No, and I'm not even
yeah.
suggesting that, but that's the way that we refer
Yeah,
to these.
sure.
I mean, these are things, because right
Yeah.
before you came in, I had
Yeah.
everybody kind of share some things
Yeah.
that they would look for: perseverance,
Yeah.
grit,
Yeah.
curiosity,
Yeah.
are all non-cognitive attributes. And if those are the things that we're really wanting,
Right.
how would it change if those were the? I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at cognitive aspects too, but it's part of the overall picture.
Mhm.
But yes, I hear you.
I think it would open access to those people who would be cut off because of the test scores. But at the same time, there's a perception issue that we have to deal with. People will just say, oh, it's this program that takes everybody. So how do we balance that would be a situation that we have to face.
Well, and we do have some programs that take everybody, and they're very good programs. But the philosophy in those programs is, if you apply, we're going to give you that opportunity, to succeed, and we're going to put in the structure, in place to make sure that happens. I do think that students are self-selecting, as well, and of course we still have the GPA and GRE, so there are some criteria that they have to meet. But I also see what you're saying. I mean, programs that can be more selective, who get more. I mean, like Mark was saying, if he gets 100 plus applications, he can't take that many students with. There's not enough faculty in the program to do that. Then how do you? Getting back to your point, then how do you make sure that you get the best? But if you already told me that the best are not necessarily the ones with the highest GPA and GRE scores, then what?
Right.
I think one of the things that I think we're currently looking for in our department is maybe not necessarily just their final GPA coming into our grad program, but more GPA trends, right? So like if we focus in on their courses that are related to what we do and how are they doing in those courses, and even if they started out poor, did they get better as time went on?
Okay.
So,
Which is pretty common.
yes.
The first 2 years are usually the worst.
Right, right.
So maybe the last 40 credit hours.
Or their major GPA.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at.
And that can, I would hope that would almost kind of be an indicator of some type of grit too,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
really digging in to get
Yeah.
to improve.
I mean, I know one of the things, and I'm there a little bit for a different reason, and I know I'm gonna gain a lot of you, it's not. So for instance, some of our programs are growing incredibly, and we don't have the resources, right? So we have too many students, I'm thinking more about undergraduates. And so some of our programs, what they've decided is to cut out students halfway through the program, have a gateway to find out if they belong or not. And so what one of our programs uses is a portfolio. And so that's another thing, as you mentioned, it's gonna show progression, I'm thinking now in graduate school. One of the problems with that is that we're cutting students again based on one instrument, and these are students that for the most part have done well. I mean, these are A and B students that we're telling you cannot continue this program because the portfolio does not reflect, you have not cut the, we can accept 20, you were 21, it's really good but not good enough, you're out. And for us, the problem is that they have nowhere to go, so they basically have missed at least 1 year of academic work. So I'm interested in this because of that, but portfolio could be another one that kind of shows an indication of progress or change or whatever.
My hope at the end, and even throughout what we're going to do next, we'll give some other examples. And I've seen, Victoria and I have both seen a number of examples of things that people have used. Because one of the questions I want to be sure that we answer are, what tools then can we use to then get at some of the qualities, those non-cognitive attributes that we say are important? How do we get to those? And we've heard some examples: portfolio, questionnaire, essays are certainly one way, or several ways that we can do that. Okay, we're going to do a little activity here. Hopefully this will be kind of interesting. What we've done is we have provided you with a rubric, or at least part of a rubric from UC Santa Barbara, and you'll see some of the things that they have been using with regard to holistic conditions. You'll see that they have 4 categories here, and there's a category for academic performance, and so this gets the more cognitive types of traditional things that they consider: research experience, publications, writing samples, GPA. But they group those together as opposed to just having GPA as one criteria. Motivational attributes: conscientiousness, curiosity, creativity, initiative, positive self-concept, leadership. Skills and research potential: communication skills, technical skills, use of literature, organization, reasoning, professional engagement, and diversity contributions. Overcoming barriers, having a non-traditional life experience, record of public service, etc. And so what we'd like for you all to do individually, take just a couple of minutes. We have provided you with a student application, and so that's the rest of the packet. So this is now it's a PhD student, but we do have a doctoral program here. But regardless, it's in clinical and school psychology, and so you'll see that this student did go to 2 universities. Their undergraduate looks like they actually went to 2 undergraduate, one associate's, and then one for the bachelor's. You see GRE score, you see a bunch of other information that we collect on our students. There's a statement of purpose here. There is kind of a little mini CV or resume, letters of recommendation, and a transcript. So just take a few minutes and go ahead and try to use this rubric to rate or score this student and see if you would want to admit this particular person into this program in clinical and school psychology. Maybe about 1 more minute or so. Okay, so let's maybe pair up just briefly, take a couple of minutes, turn to the person next to you.
There's gonna be three.
Yeah, so while we have the three of you, but so the two of you,
Actually, you have to talk out.
oh, do you,
So
okay,
sorry.
okay, now it's okay, Courtney, thank you. So one, the two of you, the two of you, the two of you, and the two of you, and just kind of share what you thought, and you can even consider these questions that I have posted here if you need that to guide that conversation. But let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to share.
Okay, yeah.
I wonder, with the statement.
I'll be in touch with you.
Given that it's because it's easy to compare, not to include somebody else's customers.
I didn't know if you wanted
Like, her, anything.
They've talked about yes, that, but I feel like there's even another one, but yes, you're right, they work in fact, it's even on our list at GS.
But
I think so, but maybe
Yeah, I mean, it's not through.
we have with there's somebody who's leading charge and they lodge and somebody else is lodging. The last conversation I had was with Tony Calvin, was still leading. Well, after meeting, I'm sorry, we even did pull us together and we had a short conversation. I love to see that.
Interpret that from 1%, that's
So,
But
so in other words,
Yeah.
23%, yeah, 23%.
Well, they're like
So in other words,
verbals and student
Yeah.
and the big one is them live in the world. I'm like, you've got to go to therapy.
Quantitative.
And they're like, oh.
But,
I said, why don't
but
you do like
then
a
you look at
summer
her transcript, and it's like,
where
well,
you need to break them
you know what I mean? Most of these things are just summers there. So I don't think it's fair, yeah, totally.
No, that's a good point, they're gonna have to think about delivery a lot better.
It was, you know, it's, yeah, it's a challenge.
And again, to me,
But
I
what you said, you know,
So that institution is running on that set, that private.
So, yeah, so, but, you know,
he knew day one that
her writing.
first, so we did third person semester, he was gonna be in. Like,
Yeah.
it's like
It's a-
Thursday,
it's-
Friday,
Yeah.
Saturday.
You can work around
Yeah.
it.
You know, with how
No.
studies and how
Pick it up geographically.
Yeah.
yeah, oh, okay, okay. And that's wrong, writing.
I don't think so.
Online, or you can.
Yeah, right. Still, and.
Okay, so let's talk about this. All right, so how'd it go?
I still have spots, can you get void for us, our
Yeah.
program? We didn't-
Yeah,
we
right.
didn't accept
Yeah.
her.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like to have her in our program.
Yeah.
Well, so, how would she have done if we had been using our more traditional GRE, GPA types of assessments? Would she have looked as strong?
No.
She would have, in our program, we do have a rubric we developed, and it does have the GRE and the GPA, and it does rank that in some ways, but over the past 5 years, every year, the GRE and the GPA, well, mostly the GRE, weight has gone down, and to a point where it's almost non-existent
Yeah.
at this point, and so which is making me wonder why we're putting students through this.
Yeah.
And so, having looked at all of her other things, that would have come out on her questionnaire, I would have definitely brought her for a group interview.
I mean, she had a strong GPA.
She had a strong
And- and
GPA.
By our standards, she would have qualified for regular admission,
Right,
but, I mean, she had a 1% on quantitative.
Yeah.
I mean, did that concern anybody? I mean, would that have kept her out? Okay.
when you look at her transcripts, I mean, she had to take, some of these courses, it's hard to determine whether or not, like, there's statistics involved in them, but she did really well, so I wouldn't be concerned at all, it's an indication to me that she doesn't test well,
Uh-huh.
you know, with
Yeah.
standardized tests.
I mean, if I was from my department, again, I'm not from counseling clinical school psychology, I don't know how important quantitative is. If they're applying for mathematics or physics, I would be like, oh my goodness. But maybe that's not that important, I guess it varies according to the program, but
Yeah,
you know, what that score
Yeah.
reveals or whatever.
yeah, I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with trying to assess somebody's quantitative skills. I mean, the GRE is really the only halfway decent measure we have of that. You know, if you use the GRE, you don't even have to use the whole GRE. You could just use the writing score. You could just use the quantitative or the verbal score in determining admission. So that's a great point. Courtney might have said, "Oh, engineering physics, 1%. We would have to really rethink this particular candidate." I mean, was there something? You know, what were some of the things that stood out to you about this candidate that would make her potentially a really successful applicant in your program?
Well, one of the things we talked about was, you know, and that's something that's not been discussed, is what's the relevance of this student to the institution, correct? Like sometimes you go more of, oh, this student's gonna have a lot to contribute to us as a student, or as a graduate, this student would be able to impact populations that our normal students would not. And so I think that's something to discuss is, oh my goodness, she'll be great in our program because of what she can already contribute as a Latina, as being in these realms that most of us may not be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that quadrant diversity contributions is really nice. And I like the contributions, because there is perspectives that we don't all have, and there's some real, pluses with that.
And it's not, and Tracy and I had this conversation yesterday, and this is where I'm gonna call on you to share if you have information to share, but it's not a race-based decision. It wasn't, oh, so she's Chiquina, so therefore we're going to, admit her. What, did you talk to general counsel yesterday?
I did, and, and basically he said, think about what kind of applicants do you want? What do you want them to be like? What kinds of contributions are you wanting them to make to the program, the community? And kind of work backward from that to then, what kinds of prompts, what kinds of things are you gonna ask? What's your criteria going to be? And, and that you get at it more by the kinds of things that you have here in this diversity contribution section, as opposed to, boxes for race and those sorts of things. And I thought it was interesting too. Did you notice after we talked yesterday, the University of Texas, the story that came out?
No, I didn't see it.
Texas Tech, their medical school is bowing to the Department of Education, said they were no longer going to use race in their admissions process.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the dust stuff there. So it's like, so I think, it's like you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
If you want to bring in a diverse population into your applicant base, then you've got to think about how are we gonna do that in a way that's not gonna fall foul of.
So Tracy called me yesterday and we had sort of a preliminary conversation and we were talking about that. And of course, for the last, I don't even want to put a time limit on it, but for at least a decade or more, we've been talking about diversifying our enrollment and bringing in more, Hispanic or African American students or other diverse students. And a lot of institutions, started saying, okay, well, these are all Black students, for example, so, we're gonna give them some extra points, or we're gonna use that as a decision. And we all have read the articles in the Chronicle where schools, and the University of Texas was one that we specifically talked about, where they have gotten in trouble as a result of that. It's like, well, wait a second, we're trying to do what we all believe in and what we were told to do, and now we're being penalized for it. This approach, I think, is the way that we need to be thinking about, diversity. And so it's not race-based decision, but rather thinking about, well, what are the contributions? And I agree with Susan. I like that terminology.
Rob, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the letter seems to really match nicely the rubric. And so one of the questions I had was, are the letter being prompted as these are items we're looking at, or they just happen that this student knew, because that's something else, correct? You might omit, it's like my involvement with issues of diversity and the students taken out because they didn't mention, maybe that's something that, but they don't see it as that important.
Thank you for asking. I am so excited you asked that question. I wasn't sure we were going to get. So I'm going to kind of jump to something that I was hoping we might end with. We can come back to it too. Yes, you can, and I would encourage you to create a page on your website on how to apply to your program. And you can, and we saw some examples of this, and I desperately tried to find these to bring them to share with you today. But I saw a program at a university where they had a video from the program director talking to potential applicants. They provided sample letters of reference. As a matter of fact, some schools, they've moved away from letters of reference and they provide text boxes with very specific questions, like talk about perseverance, talk about the student's curiosity, talk about their contributions to diversity, to force it. Because if that's what you're looking for, then force the issue and get people to address those things. And share your rubric on your website, saying these are the things that we're looking for, and have them basically, so your process is completely transparent, and you're going to get a much better, stronger applicant pool if you do those things. And so like I said, I would create a page dedicated to applying to your program. This is how you do it, and give them as much information, as much guidance as possible.
Well, it was interesting what Courtney said, where she actually got a letter about how not to write a biased recommendation, like.
Yes.
I did miss that.
And that should probably need to happen at a university level, not just every program for themselves. I mean, that you can use if you like, of course, but, I was pretty intrigued by that. I think it's got a lot of potential.
Go ahead and take one of those, take one of those, and then there's 3 that I'm handing out here. These are 3 additional rubrics that I picked up it was the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools. I went to a holistic admissions workshop, and so these were some materials that were shared with us. So I did not go out and, these are not curated, like these are the best of the best, but I liked them because they were all different from one another. And so you can see how different schools are thinking about this and what some of the criteria are. And they're also applying these to scholarship applications as well, thinking more holistically. And that's something that we're going to have to do, because every time we have a conversation about holistic admissions, on the gap, for example, somebody always says, well, but the provost and chancellor fellowships all require that they have a 3.7 and GRE scores of whatever. And my response is, we could change that. I mean, those are our rules. And are those necessarily the best students, for this? I do want to point out one of these rubrics that I thought was interesting, and I think this is also from UC Santa Barbara, but it's the one that says MESM Admissions Rubric 1718. It's a 2-sided rubric, and I like this one because it's very detailed, for one, and it gives an indication of sort of what they have in their admissions, their application. So obviously they have a statement of purpose. I know some of you have some document like that, whether it's a statement of purpose, a philosophy of teaching, why you wanted to go to grad school, whatever. Then they require a resume for a veto. And I know we do that, but the reason we do it really is more about
We want to just make sure that there's nothing missing in your
Yeah.
life that might warrant a concern.
where were you for 3 years? Kind of thing.
I see this gap.
Yeah. So academic preparedness, and so did they take the right courses, for example? Some programs might want to wait where they earned an undergraduate degree, or what program they came from, and those, could be considered. Personal achievements and contributions, and so that's continued on to the next page.
And when you say that, it's not only prestigious, but it might be from a traditionally
Yeah.
institution or something.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think you can define what those things are, or programs where you just know that they are aligned well with your program. And I know in my own discipline, there are schools that I think I would, and they're not the most prestigious schools, but they're schools that I would really rather have students coming from, maybe because I think they would fit better here or something. Letters of recommendation. And again, I think getting back to Precious's earlier comment about those letters, I think they can be problematic, but going back to my earlier suggestion is, instead of a letter, maybe having a series of prompts might be better. And you notice that they assign point values to each of those. But what I thought was interesting in this particular one is that they have 3 categories: diversity contribution, where there's no point value, but it is something that they consider. And I'm not saying that there should or shouldn't be points, but I just wanted to point out that they chose not to assign points. English language skills for international students and GRE scores. So they do look at GRE scores, but what I really liked here is that they have a statement here, the UCSB Graduate Division further states, there is no evidence that performance of the GRE correlates with intelligence. And so it puts it right out there. My guess is that maybe there's either the expectation of the GRE or a requirement of the GRE, and so this may be a way around that.
I would also approach say, your ability to speak English doesn't correlate with intelligence.
No, it does not, exactly. And so for that, it's really more about, are there additional barriers that they're gonna have to overcome? But I'm in the process right now of chairing the search for the new director of the Appalachian English Language Institute, Intensive Language Institute. So now we're gonna be in a position where we can bring international students whose English language skills aren't quite where they need to be to start school, that they can come here, learn English, and then transition right in. And that's something we've never had before that I think is a game changer for us. So that ties nicely into that. So anyway, these are some different examples of some things that you might want to consider. And so I think on our, this is one of the last slides I have, but so let's go back to that initial question I asked. What are some other attributes that you might want to consider based on looking at some of these things or some of the things that we've already discussed? Anything else you want to throw out there?
Are interviews part of the process?
Interviews can be, and as a matter of fact, we do have programs that do interviews. Clinical psychology does interviews. I think, I was going to say HBC programs do. As a matter of fact, I was once told by clinical psych when I was doing the provost and chancellor fellowships, do not award a fellowship without talking to us first. And I remember the very first time, I saw these students who had 4.0 and they were in the 98th percentile on these scores. And I would contact, say, Lisa Curtin, and she'd say, no, we're not going to admit them. And my first reaction was, are you kidding me? And then I realized, oh, well, I know exactly why, because this person may not be able to talk to anybody and or interact with human beings. And that's not the kind of student that they necessarily wanted. I mean, they wanted strong, academically strong students, but also students who knew how to communicate. And of course, HPC programs are definitely that way. A lot of teacher ed programs are that way.
Yeah, that's what I think we struggle with, is we have two phases to this thing. We see them on Slate, and we have all of these things here to look at, and we're trying to really look at whether this person's going to be a great counselor or not. That's hard to do on paper. We do have a group interview day. They spend the full day with us, and I'm much more comfortable then making decisions. It's harder to do that initial.
So do they come to campus?
They come to
Yeah,
campus.
for a full day.
It's required. They come to campus. They come for a full day with us from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, and we have all kinds of things planned through the day where we get to see them interact with each other, and we have all kinds of other things happening. And when I have that day, and that's a smaller group. Because we we might have 100 applications on Slate, we invite 50 to campus. That deciding our cohort out of that 50 is much easier for me, because as a counselor myself, I want to see people, be in the room with them, talk to them, see if they have those skills. But trying to get to these non-cognitive attributes on a paper application, is much more difficult. And so that's what I'm looking for right now, is if we don't use something like the GRE, or if we're more interested in some of these other areas, what that might look like. Our questionnaire is good. I don't know if it's perfect, but it's okay. And but trying to think about how to, can I ask a tech question on Slate? Could a video?
I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
So there are, and a couple of years ago got really excited about this feature that we can upload video. So Like the music department requires samples of their performances. So what I said was, why couldn't we do the same thing with applicants? So you could have them post a video of that, like, here's a series of questions I want you to answer in like a comfortable environment and show us you doing you. What a great way to see the person before you see, like while you're seeing them on paper and see if it kind of lines up.
So that's a possibility.
So it is a total possibility.
So that's a great segue into the next question. What are some tools that we could use? We've already talked about some of those. Again, in fact, I even listed some earlier. Essays, interviews, auditions, videos, questionnaires, GRE. What are some other tools that we might want to consider that might get to some of those attributes, cognitive or otherwise? Portfolios, there you go, yeah, right.
You know what I thought was interesting is, and this is an undergrad, my son is in Amherst, and instead of asking for those essays, they always ask for those prompts, what did you do in summer, or what's some kind of adversity thing that you've overcome. They asked for a paper from high school that was graded by a faculty person, not that they were judging the feedback, but I thought that is the way we should be doing it. Because, you know, I don't know about any of you if you have high school students, but when they get in the game to try to get into college, they're writing like 16 different ways of this prompt, and it's almost kind of a, sorry, this is probably a negative perspective, but it's almost kind of like a game, you know what I mean? Because they go online and see the best way to answer such and such. So I thought, now that to me was like, get academic work that was, you know, obviously they're going to self-select and hopefully they pick their best, right? But that was interesting to me. I thought, yeah, you know, somebody else thought of that. That's why it's great. Anyway, I thought that was a really nice, and that was undergrad, but wouldn't you love to see a real paper coming from an undergrad solid institution where they did real work and got a grade and it was something good, you know? I don't know. But I thought that was an interesting data source that I hadn't thought about before, because it's always been those kind of prompts that everybody knows about, we recycle a zillion times when it comes time to select students. So anyway.
I'm thinking, you know, a student, you know, I'm thinking about like Ray, for example, in biology. You know, maybe as an undergrad, they have publication. So submitting a publication.
Or a research project with a faculty person, and why did you select this? Not just turn in the paper, but why is this representative of you and your work and what you believe in and where you want to go and take this, and, you know, I think that would be a cool data source. And I love the idea that you did a full day interview, because we used to do interviews and then I don't think we were doing them right, frankly, because they all looked the same. There were 20 minutes, we were like pulling people through like this. By the end, I'm like, I can't even remember who said what, you know? And I didn't feel like, and maybe our rubric wasn't right. I just didn't feel like, after a while, the 3 days we spent doing those became like, are we even gaining enough to make this worthwhile anymore? So always check in, what are we getting from this? What is this data source telling us? Is it helpful in our selection process? That kind of thing. I like that idea that you do a whole day and you see them interact with each other too, not just, hey, how well did you answer my questions?
Well, we interview them, but our current students interview them as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
And there's a rubric, and that's always interesting feedback. And that's always, when we get in the room to deliberate, we have a stack of the student feedback. So if we have if we find ourselves in some sort of stalemate on a student, we go to that student feedback, and it almost is like another vote. That's, you know, and it's also I would say, you know, we have volunteers, our students volunteer to do that on those days, so I would say they're maybe the more satisfied customers, you know.
Which is fine.
Right, but they sort of are selling our program to these students as well, you know, so.
You know, a lot of this can take a long time. I mean, obviously, investing that kind of time into interviews, and I'm thinking about Precious, for example. I think Precious has the biggest program on campus. They have about 200 and something students total between the certificate, which is almost a full-blown degree, because it's 24 hours. I mean, a master's degree only has to be 30, so they're just short of that. Plus a master's, plus the EDS in school leadership. So there are a lot of students. But what I would say is undergraduate admissions is doing a holistic approach. They get thousands and thousands of applications, and they're admissions folks are trained now to do that activity that we just did and basically spend like a minute, just scanning. They know what to look for, they know what to keep in mind, and then they have a rubric and they do that. And so it may be that Precious, for example, might not do interviews because that may not be possible. But it may be that some of these other tools, might work for some of those bigger programs. Or maybe, you get to a point where maybe you do something like that for the EDS because it's a smaller program, it's a smaller pool, it's a higher level. I could see Tracy, doing something like that a little bit more with doctoral students. Keep thinking. We're not going to be able to come up with an exhaustive list today, but keep thinking about some of the different tools. I mean, even here, the resume, is a tool that you could use. A statement of purpose. Those letters of recommendation can be a really powerful tool, especially I think if you do the prompts. TOEFL and IELTS, of course, for international students, are some other tools that that exist out there that you may want to consider. I'll share one other one that I heard about that I thought was really interesting. MIT has moved to a different approach for admissions, at least for some of their programs. And what they do is they created a MOOC, and it's free. And so thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000, I don't know, whatever, students will do the MOOC. And what they look at is who finishes it, first of all, and who does the best. And so for the top 5 or 10% of the students who finish the MOOC, they offer them admission. They're like, oh, you've got the persistence, you've got the cognitive abilities, it gets to a lot of the things that they're looking for in terms of quality applicants to MIT. And I thought, well, how clever is that? So then I got to thinking, all right, for some of our programs, what could you maybe have them do? So an example is, and I don't know how feasible this is, but imagine inviting every student who was ever interested in your program to take a non-degree class prior to admission, and then see how well they do in the class, and then decide from that experience, who you're going to admit. And maybe that's one factor, but imagine how that would change, your admissions.
But I like those ideas, Rob, but they are a question of access, right? So if I have to take the MOOC or I have to take the non-degree class, do I have the means to do that? I'm coming from a place perhaps where connectivity is an issue. I can't even talk about it in the first place.
Yeah.
Or you're talking about a non-degree thing, and I don't have the means to do that. In other words, I am already screened out. Even if these are good intentions, I'm screened out based on
Absolutely, that's a very good point, and you need to think about those things. So are you unintentionally screening out people that may have been good applicants? So these are just options, for us to consider, but they're outside of the norm of what we typically think of. So anyway, I think we're at time, right? It was an hour. So any final comments, questions, concerns, issues, tips? Yeah, Bernard.
What's our feedback to those who are not accepted? Correct? And that's part of what we're dealing with is that those students are like, okay, you didn't make the cut, sorry. What should be our response? How much information do we provide? It's like, well, you did not address diversity. I don't know how much detail, what's the liability or that?
You deal with this.
Well, we're not going to say, okay, well, your GRE was terrible and your GPA was acceptable, but But so when students call us and I don't say, okay, I can look at the application 9 out of 10 and be like, this is why you didn't get in.
But we don't.
But I don't say that. I know personally, but I don't say that. And then other times it's like they have a 4.0 and they scored high on the GRE, and I'm like, well, those things look really good. So where am I missing something? And then I start delving deeper, and then I find the documents, and I start looking through materials, personal statements, and letters of recommendation, and questionnaires, and I can see where the pieces are missing. But the question is, I want to improve so I can reapply next year. What can I do better? the hardest thing, so I work as a lot, I work with the programs, we talk a lot. I know what you're looking for. I know what things that you're wanting to pull from applications. So I stress those things. So if you're looking to do this program, these are the things you want to include in a personal statement. They want to know this. If you're looking to apply to a program that has a questionnaire, print out the questions of the questionnaire and take time writing out your responses. Think through those responses and make sure that you're answering them to make you competitive, that this is a program that's going to not only help you in your future, but you're going to be a great representative of our school. But the things we don't know, we can't help you on. So if there is something that you're reviewing and it's not in there, let's say that you require 1 year of service in your field of industry, like in the resume, like you look for that, but you don't tell us that, and it's also not listed anywhere on the like in your page. So when students look, it says, you need to answer these questions, or you need to do this questionnaire, and it tells you exactly what you're looking for. But if you don't say we're looking specifically for this, and that's not in there, how do I say, well, you don't have this?
It gets back to my earlier suggestion of being very transparent and share with the students what you're looking for. And so if you're looking for service, if you're looking for diversity contributions, then tell them that. And then if somebody doesn't get in, to Victoria's point, you don't have to give them specific examples like, well, you were missing this, or you scored poorly on this, but rather, take a look at our rubric again and look at what you submitted and see how well that matches up. I was thinking, I respond to students in the way that I respond to a group prior to applications. If a group were to say, well, how do I get into the program? I would say, well, this program really emphasizes X, Y, and Z. So if an individual student later comes and says, I didn't get in, I'd say, well, that program emphasizes X, Y, and Z. So, you need to do a self-evaluation to see where that is, but I can't give you, because at the end of the day, it may be that they were number 21. And,
there.
yeah, and I hate that, but at the same time, at some point, some programs have to cut off admissions. And it may just be your timing was, next year you would have gotten it, last year you might have gotten it. Yeah.
If we do wanna change our admissions
Yeah.
requirements or tweak them.
Yeah.
How do we do that and how quickly can it happen?
Yeah, so that's this ongoing conversation, and it's a multi-layered conversation, but to your question, admission requirements, I've asked this question of the dean over the years, like, do those need to go through AP&P?
Right.
And sometimes I'm told, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Other times it's like, well, they're admission requirements, they're not. So I would say that it probably ought to, be vetted somehow in that regard. So I would go ahead and have those conversations this summer, get those, maybe submit those through AP&P unless I find out otherwise. And then it may be such that, if you think about the cycles we're on, you probably, what would be the first term you'd even want to implement this? It probably would be until fall of 2020 anyway, because you want to give students time. If you get this even approved in say October, it's too late for spring anyway. So I would say if you got it approved, next fall, that you could probably start publishing those as requirements, for the following fall. Now, the reason I said that was multi-layered is because I think the grad school needs to change, and this is what Susan and I were talking about before the session. We need to really look at our language. The GRE waiver is great for programs that really don't value that, and we say, well, you can have alternative criteria. So that's kind of getting us to holistic admissions, but I still don't like the language of a waiver, because that suggests that, well, GRE is really, really important, and we're not going to make you take it, but it's not the right language in my mind to use when we're talking more holistically. because it still seems to suggest that there's some value to the GRE.
So I just want to clarify a couple things around that. So, I understand sort of larger sort of structural changes that we might make in our admissions, go through AP&P and maybe implement that. But if we wanted to do some things for this next round, like waive the GRE, is that something that we can just do?
Yeah, so you don't currently have the GRE waiver in place for your okay, so one thing you can do is you can email, we have a form, of course we have a form for everything. The GRE waiver form, and basically it just says, instead of the GRE, we want to consider this, and my gosh, you guys do interviews, and so you could just use that as your alternative criteria. So that's an easy one for you. And then we'll get it in the bullet, because we'll make bulletin changes.
Right.
And so that actually is not even an AP&P thing. We'll make that change for the next bulletin. And you'll be listed on that. And we have, 20 programs that have that already, some of them do work experience, some of them it's an audition, some of them it's a GPA.
But altering our internal rubrics that we use to
that you can do on your own. If you've got sort of an internal process, the thing is, getting back to Daisy's question, if you wanted to start doing interviews and you're not doing interviews, and that's an admission criteria, we need to get that approved and in the bulletin. If you're changing your rubric that you're already using, because ultimately with admissions, you're giving us a recommendation, but what those conversations look like within your program to make that recommendation is on you. But if you suddenly decide you want to have them submit an essay, or if you want to suddenly have them do an interview or a questionnaire, I think those things need to be approved. I would like
the video.
The video, exactly. If you're going to say we're not going to require a video input into Slate, that probably, because there's a section in the bulletin that has admission criteria, and I'm going to go back and talk to Mike today to see what his position is on this. But in the past, generally the deans have said, that stuff like that probably needs to go through AP&P.
Got it. Okay.
Is there any research on the unintended consequences of giving up the GRE? Does it have any place as a data source? Maybe not in certain programs. I was just curious. It'll be interesting if you do. Your pool might grow, which might be nice, but I'm just curious. It'll be interesting to see how that works
I've been
out.
reading a little bit here and there,
I've
but
been
it's
keep
been
my eye on it,
inconsistent, really.
And it's just starting,
Yeah.
so we don't know long-term impact and what programs are going through because they gave up GREs. Now is it harder to understand their cognitive academic piece because you don't, and even if you don't rely on it totally, like she had a 1%, is it still not valuable at all? You know what I mean?
I think there's still going to be value to it. And again, in certain scores, if you talk to ETS, they've been in some of these meetings. They realize that the tides have turned, and so they don't argue with us that about holistic admissions. In fact, they have a great document, and there's some things I'll share with you via email after this. One being a publication from the Council of Graduate Schools on holistic admissions at the graduate level. But ETS will say a lot of schools have been using it incorrectly, and they'll say don't do a cutoff score. Don't say we're only going to consider those applicants who achieve in a certain percentile, but rather maybe what you could do is they use this term of like it's not opt-in, but like we'll use yours as an example again. You have 100 applicants. Let's say you're only going to take 20. In the past, you might have said, well, and I know you didn't do this, but a program like yours might have said, well, we're only going to consider those who score in the 80th percentile or higher. What ETS will say is, how about looking at the 100 applicants and using the GRE score to take the top 80%? So that you had to score, or top 50%. So let's create a larger pool, and that pool for the one cut might be that you're at a certain percent, but then you use other criteria to narrow it down from there. As instead of a sole indicator or sole attribute that you're using. It's a subtle difference, but I see what they're getting at. You might eliminate those students who just do really poorly, but if you did that, you also would eliminate that student that we just looked at.
Right.
Because even though we would have allowed them to be a regular admit, there are some programs that would have seen that 1% said, she's out totally. And perhaps what a shame, because she could have been the best student you ever had.
I talked to programs who said that when they look at the GRE and the GPA, it's more concerning that the GRE is higher than the GPA. That student is less likely to get in than the person who has a higher GPA and a lower GRE. For the reasons you mentioned, it could have been a bad test day.
Yep.
I mean, it could have been a bad test pool for everybody since it's a standardized test. I mean, and they could not test well. So, where do you weigh those? There's something to be said for it.
Okay. We've got 15 minutes over, so I want to respect your time. We're happy to stick around if you have any further questions. I will follow up with an email. I've got some things. University of Michigan has a really great website on holistic admissions. Virginia Tech has some videos on holistic admissions. And then that document for CGS, I'll send at least all 3 of those to each one of you. If you want to follow up on any of those, they may be useful resources to you. But we'll continue at the grad school having this conversation and try to move us, in this direction more and more. And it's not one of those things that every program has to do it. But I think we need to break down some of the barriers, tear down those barriers that is preventing individual programs from wanting to do it the way that I think it needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you.